just first off, thanks for doing this. I know that you were one of the first that I actually told that I was venturing into YouTube and putting this channel together, and really focusing on the trainee element, and coming from a quite a different background to let's say somebody who's been in tech all their life. It's it's tough being a trainee, and what I thought is with me and you starting at pretty much the same time. I know maybe I think I was maybe 2 or 3 months before you, but we both joined, both are now kind of in a technical area, but started on different paths. So I was going to ask you first, because even though we work at the same company, I actually don't have a clue what you do. So yeah, first off, Jason, what do you actually do?
Well, this is it's an interesting question, because as I'm sure we both know, we'll have similar reactions when people have said, "What do you do? What do you do?" So, well, I work for this company, and my job is, in my case, assistant manager, data analytics. And you talk a little bit about what you do. So I take data and I analyze it and produce outputs for the business. And they'll say, "So what do you do?" I'm just none the wiser. And it does get you thinking, what do I do? And the best way that I can probably describe it is, in a sense, the business is agnostic of you. So I work in an internal audit team. We're a little function, and we have access to our company's data. We're able to query that data and draw insights from it. So let's say, for example, the best way I can describe what I do is that a specific business area will come to me, or someone in my team will come to me and say, "We're worried about something. Can you give us some insight into it?" So let's say we're working with a branch network. We want to know how many people in our branches are performing transactions outside of regular opening hours. And then I'll disappear off, or one of my team will disappear off, squirrel away in the data warehouse, and pull out something, all the transactions via SQL, Power BI, whatever the tool happens to be, and give the team a list of transactions. There you go, all the transactions that occurred outside of working hours in the last quarter. So I suppose that's where data analysts, in a sense, but working under the umbrella of internal audit. If that makes it any clearer, I hope it does.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, the tech world is really confusing, because you've mentioned things like SQL, Power BI, and I'm talking SQL, Python from my perspective, and Power BI. But the thing that really confuses me is the roles, the titles of individuals, because you could be an engineer, you could be a developer, you could be an analyst, and actually you've got a requirement to code in SQL, in Python, use Power BI to display and visualize data. And actually, if you're a trainee and you're looking at the technical market, how do you even know what to do? And I think if we can touch on the trainee, because I know that you didn't start in data and analytics. You started in, a section of the business that actually people fear. They go, "Oh, it's audit." So yeah, I mean, can you talk about your journey? Where were you working before you joined Skipton, and actually, what were some of the challenges going from where you worked into that audit arena?
Sure. If we go, I won't bore you to death with some of the specifics, but if we go back to sort of education, left school, went to college. Weirdly, my first job was an apprentice plumber. As it turns out, I sucked. I was really bad. Wasn't particularly great with my hands in a technical role. A vocational role. So I went to work for Tesco, specifically an offshoot of Tesco called One Stop Stores. I spent 6 years there, which in hindsight was too long. Grateful for the opportunity, and it paid the bills. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And prior to that, while I was at college, the little internship with the company that I now work for in the salaries department. Then went to uni, UCLan. If anybody's out there who went to University Central Lancashire, that was me as well. BSc in computing, and then left there. A little bit of time passed while I worked for Tesco as just really shelf stacking assistant manager type roles, looking after a team. And then, as you might well remember, Mr. Wilson, we met in a pub a number of years later, and you said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, working a couple of doors down at the convenience store. And you said, "Well, you get talking as you do. How many stories start?" Well, I was talking to someone in a pub, and I work at Skipton. Oh, really? Well, I worked at Skipton too. Oh, where did you work? Oh, salaries. Oh, well, why don't you reapply? I think that was the way it went, something like that. I don't know if you remember it differently.
No, I remember that very well, and I think at that time, yeah, I think if you look at the market back then, it was actually rare to have trainees, and if I remember rightly, there were quite a few trainee roles that I'd sort of said to you, look, I think I'd mentioned that we had a trainee tester role that you might be interested in, or I can't remember the whole story. So
You bet I can remember. I can remember all 5 of them, because I applied for 5. It was just I needed to move on, I think. So you did say, why don't you reapply? We've got some, I think it was SQL development, and then there was a equivalent of sort of data delivery team type role. So a SQL, let me get this right. I said I'd remember in pressure. So the first one that I applied for was IT risk. Then it was IT internal audit, all trainee positions, SQL developer, SQL tester, and then the equivalent of a software testing role trainee in the software development team, same company. And audit was the first one to return a response. I think I'd picked a really bad week to apply because the L&D guy was on leave. It was just one of those, just completely coincidental. So audit picked me up and said, "Oh, we'd be happy to." Went through the interview process, and they said, "Oh, we're happy to give you the role." And that, bear in mind, I didn't know really much about the financial services, which is a business that we're in, and didn't know what internal audit would have done. We'd had auditors in the retail business. I knew what they did, but again, from the other side, I did fear them because I knew what they were in for. I knew what they were coming to test us for, and I knew that, drop you some points for that. You're not signed this off. Your tills are 5p different than they should be. So got the role, 2015, I think it was, autumn, and really that was the first time I'd used the degree. I nearly became a statistic. I don't know what the number is now, but it's a crazy number where people don't then go into the field that they're trained for. And spent, just to quickly run through that, so 2015 to 19 internal audit work, going around the business, auditing their risks and controls. And then we had a new head of come in 2019, and immediately it was clear he'd come from a background where they had a fully functioning DA team, which was separate from their internal audit function. And he developed that and made my role full-time DA. So I did a bit of internal audit, and then you could almost say 20% of it was data analytics on the side. So he quickly made that role full-time. It gave us another full-time position. So there's 2 of us, and then quickly a 3rd person came on board. So it was clearly a growing business. But I'd not trained, and I'm sure we'll come on to this a little bit later, I'd not trained in data analysis, hadn't trained in what would now be classed, and if I were retaking my degree or going to uni today, I'd probably look in the data science field, which I'm sure will be a focus of conversation later on. But that's kind of a me waffling on about my history. That's where I came from.
Yeah, no, it's really good to listen to the background of that, and obviously I've got more of an insight into that than most, and I know we've had regular catch-ups, lifts to work, and seeing your car break down on multiple occasions,
You were in the car at
which
one time.
which
Spectacular.
is quite amusing for those listening. Jason drives an Alfa Romeo, and all the stories that I ever heard about an Alfa Romeo are in fact true, because I've witnessed it firsthand, and I've witnessed the amount of money that goes into keeping an Alfa Romeo on the road. So, yeah, absolutely brilliant. Um, so one of the things that I did sort of want to touch on before moving on to some of I guess the programming technology is, what did you find challenging? Because you came from retail and then you were trainee auditor, and you must have had the same shock as what I had, because I came from a delivery service. You come from retail, and although you've got computer science, you're thrust into what is quite an important part of any business, especially financial organizations. And you must have had to do multiple exams and so on. So yeah, just what were the main challenges that you faced?
Um, there's quite a few bits in there. So I suppose when it came to the application process, I did not think about it. I'll be honest, did no research. Um, went into it completely cold. And so and bear in mind at that point my degree was 6 years old. So to summarize some of the technologies we looked in, I mean, I was fully prepared. I'd taken my Cisco CCNA at the time, 3.1 syllabus, so 2009, 10, 11 was the background and what I wanted to do. So having moved into internal audit, knowing nothing about the business or what the function did in a financial services type business, I had to really just soak up what I was hearing. And there were some acronyms that got bounded about. So IIA, Institute of Internal Auditors, is kind of a framework that governs the internal audit, best practices, code of ethics, that sort of thing. But in terms of exams, it would have been CISA, so that's Certified Information Systems Auditor, offered by a company called ISACA. So that's our IT-based internal audit qualification, which I took, and just, I think, certified only a couple of years ago. It seems to take ages. You need 5 years of experience, and bear in mind, I was a noob. I was properly wet behind the ears. So it was really had to wait the full 5 years. My degree only counted for one of the year's worth of credits. And then I've taken, just about to take the, I think it's changed now, it's called the PL300, which is the Power BI and Microsoft entry-level qualification. It's kind of a fancy Power BI qualification, but is an introduction to it. Challenges. I think getting the technology is one thing. There's plenty of support for SQL, plenty of support for Power BI, and plenty of support for the CISA framework. What I wasn't prepared for, I guess, and naively, was the level of regulation. And then if I was going to say another challenge, it's once you've learned the qualifications and once you've got a little bit more au fait with the languages, the database query languages, SQL in our case, was knowing where do I go to get the things I need. And for the company specific things, so you think, okay, so object oriented database type stuff, but all of this is specific to our company, and our company does it this way. That would be the biggest challenge, I think. Just learning how things work and how they come together. Because again, I was a noob, so the business was very helpful, but you do feel a bit like a fish out of water. This is all new, and I'd done a little bit of SQL, but by then it was nearly 10 years old. The qualification was 10 years old. It's all gone. So learning that again, W3 Schools was a regular haunt of mine, alongside a couple of the other, what they're called, Coursera, Cybrary, or nowadays it will be Data Camp, and there's one I'm missing.
Stack Overflow.
It came to me. Oh, we both use it as well. Coursera, Udemy.
Oh, Udemy.
Yeah,
Right,
Udemy.
okay. Yeah.
But those would be my first two challenges, coming from a completely different business, dealing with the regulatory aspect because financial services, and not knowing what the technology was, having to relearn some of it, and then learning it, and then realizing, oh, bugger, cloud's coming, Azure's coming. What does that mean? Does that mean what I've done now is obsolete? Am I going to have to relearn? And I think those three, so it's technology, regulation, and then just being new and not knowing what things do and how they should be done and how they work. So, not too much.
Yeah, certainly not too much. And I think one of the things that you touched on there, and it's around cloud, and obviously I'm in the cloud data engineering team, essentially part of the data and information services department. And I think one of the things that I've seen is speed of change within cloud, and how do you cope with that, knowing that you could look to something, you could look from an audit perspective, and then actually you perform an audit 3-4 weeks later, what was best practice is now redundant.
It's true. So for those who probably don't know, internal audit, certainly from my perspective, is generally point in time, unless it's a project review where you're following an iterative process. They're generally testing at a point in time. So you'll take a framework or a business area at that point, and you'll test it based on current best practice, risks, controls, etc. And that does happen. It is a challenge, but you can only work with knowledge and best practice as it exists and at the time that you're performing it. And of course, the main challenge really there was to take a data and information services team or similar team that looks after data for an organization. What you do on a daily basis is bloody complicated. Understanding how data fits together, how it should be modeled, how it should be constructed, how it should be made available, the controls around that, security, not to mention all the other things that I haven't touched upon there that you still do on a day-to-day basis. We've got to come in and we might have 2 or 3 weeks to really try and form an in-depth review of something that you've trained throughout your career to be proficient at, but to become an SME. I think that's the hardest thing. That's the bit that I found really difficult as an auditor when I was in kind of the thick of auditing as a full-time job. Was these guys do this every day, and yet I'm coming in and almost having to not pick fault, but advise them where controls might be falling over or where risks might be present. And that was difficult because in a technical area such as that, in a governance area where you've got rules, you've got a framework to adhere to, that's one thing. But in an area where you don't necessarily know the scripting language, you don't necessarily know the technologies and what they're capable of, that's a challenge. We do it, but it's having to pick it up so quickly. That's the challenge, because by the time you think you have a grasp of it, the audit's coming to an end, and you have to make a decision on that on those tests and the findings that you might present to the business. So for me, it was always do I understand this business area, and is what I'm flagging correct and accurate to the best of my knowledge? Because you do this every day, and I'm relying on you to tell me what you do, but then I have to understand it and process it, and then come back with what I think is the correct answer, certainly from that audit world.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, it's really interesting to hear that from the perspective, and actually taking a step back and understanding how the person's feeling rather than just understanding the process. Now, as you'll know, that we've now recruited quite a few trainees into Skipton, and I'm yeah, and well, me and you both came from well, you had a little bit more of a technical background than I did, with your Cisco and a little bit of SQL. I mean, I had biology and forensics and that sort of stuff. But what would be the best advice that you could give to a trainee coming into the business now to help them along their journey? And it doesn't have to be a lot, just what is a couple of things that would help them.
I'd steal some words from a wiser man than myself. One of my uni lecturers, actually, weirdly, he's quite a sarcastic man, but he would often throw one-liners at you, and simple as well. The first one I put on there is don't ever tell yourself you can't do it, because then as a pessimist, a defeatist attitude will stop you dead in your tracks. So that would be my first one. Always have a go, basically. And I think it helps to be interested, because when it gets difficult, you'll persevere, you'll stick with it. If you like it, you'll stick with it, you'll make it work. And the sort of flip side of that same coin is don't be afraid to say this actually isn't for me. I thought it was something I was interested in, but it isn't for me, at least not in this incarnation. Because generally, I'm sure other companies will be the same. Certainly at Skipton, you have the ability to. There's so many different business areas. You have the choice to whether or not you want to second, you want to go into a different trainee program, you want to diversify in some way. You can do that. Okay, you might have to wait a little while, but you can do it. So don't get stuck. You always have. You'll give yourself options. Of course, there's your means may vary. You might not be able to just drop what you're doing, but certainly give yourself options. I don't think there's any room for slacking. I think if you're really interested in something, you still have to put in a bit of hard work. It won't come to you. You want to be proficient at SQL. I found you have to put the time in. I can't do 10 minutes a week and expect to be great at it. It's never going to happen. So give it the time it deserves would be, I think that's number 3. Number 4, I think, would be build yourself a nice network of people and treat them nicely. I know this is not fundamental, groundbreaking stuff, but you do realize that there's always going to be people out there who've got more knowledge than you. They've got connections. They've got more connections than you, and that's not a bad thing. But you can only learn so much from one person in one place. So build a network of people, look after them, and they'll help you. You can help each other, and you'll learn collectively. And I think 5. This is optional because I've stayed in the same role for coming up to 7 years. It might be that you need to see the way different equivalent teams work. So if you're working for one company in a database role or a data analyst role or whatever the role happens to be, and if it works for you, because I do it. I haven't transferred to different businesses, but I do talk to people in different businesses. It's all right. You do things like this. You have a I don't know. You don't use Power BI because your your database isn't at the point yet where you can consume data easily. Okay, so you use Excel, but you have a good control framework around Excel, so you're confident that what you're producing is good. So don't be afraid to talk to other people. Talk to other trainees, not necessarily in the same business area, but how have they found their journey? How do they cope with not knowing what to do? It's one of those examples, isn't it, where you think you walk into a new role and you think, oh my God, there's been a secret class taught somewhere that I don't know about, wasn't invited to, and everyone's brainier than me. So sometimes I turn up to the the ACE sessions that we have, where it's a sort of an analyst and an analytics community for the whole business to attend if they wish. You think, God, everyone here is brainier than I am. That they're already using this technology. I haven't even touched that yet. Well, don't shy away from that. Go and ask them. That's probably my biggest failing, is worrying that people know more than I do. Don't be afraid to ask a question.
But do you know what, Jason? It's been absolutely brilliant to talk to you, and thanks for shedding some light on audit, data and analytics, and the tips that you can give to somebody just starting out. I think I found it useful. I hope whoever's watching the video finds it useful, and yeah, let's hope that more people want to get involved and share their story. So
I hope they do.
thanks
Because
again.
not at all, not at all. No, I appreciate it. Appreciate the time. I hope they do as well, because it's different from certainly when we first joined. The when I was doing my degree, it seemed as though there was very little out there. Data analytics, you said those words back in 2011. I don't think you'd have been met with too much enthusiasm. What's that? Would probably have existed at the time, but certainly today, I mean, we've got a graduate who's just joined us. I don't know if you're aware, the Connecting Our Future program. We've got a graduate, and he said, "Oh, I don't think I'll be able to help you very much. I don't know particularly much," and he does because he's taken his degree recently. He's still doing it. It's got so much. It's developed so much. It's got a far greater following, a far greater recognition. Certainly in the academic space, it seems, at least to me. It's a very exciting area, and with Azure, Python, Databricks, Power BI, not to mention all the other ones, the Alteryxes, the Ideas, the Arbutus. It's unnerving and slightly nerve-wracking where it's going, but in a good way. What about you? Because over the last 2 years, dread to think how much extracurricular stuff you've done outside work just to be able to get to grips with some aspects of Azure. It's been a long journey, hasn't it?
It's been a long journey. I mutinied as well, which you know of. I spent 140 hours studying the Azure Data Engineer exam. I did that over 3 months whilst working and leading on two quite high profile projects for the society. And do you know what? Actually, looking back, I think I had a bit of a breakdown. I think I just did too much, and you can do too much. It's in everybody's DNA, and you want to succeed. You want to do a good job. You want to progress. You want to know all about technology, and how you keep up with technology is something that might give you sleepless nights. For me, it was, well, how do I stay relevant? How do I increase my knowledge and help other people? And I probably just overdid it, and that's what led to a mutiny, a switch from companies. Absolutely brilliant. What an experience. but extremely fortunate to have been able to come back as a cloud data engineer. But what I have realised is that, do you know what? There's an opportunity to help people, because I feel like the trainee all the time because of the pace of change within cloud, and that's what videos like this are all about, is creating that exposure, helping people like the graduate that's joined you, the graduate that's joined me. I'm helping quite closely, and yeah, just seeing what we can do, how we can group together. I actually had this really cheesy idea that let's create a fellowship. I've introduced my son to Lord of the Rings. He'd never watched it before, and we ended up watching Return of the King, and I thought, oh yeah, let's create a fellowship, like-minded individuals. Yeah. So
every day is a learning day.
it certainly is. And yeah, I think we are just running out of time though. So yeah, much appreciated, and thanks again.
So I'm happy to be part of it.